Welcome to the Courage to Live podcast. My name is Josh Bitsko, and I'm a retired police captain with 24 years of experience out of Las Vegas. Currently, I travel the country and I teach people about courage, resilience, and leadership. Today, I'm joined by my co-host and wife, Jenna.
Hi.
And in today's podcast, we're going to talk about a difficult subject. Going to go through the active shooter incident at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. I know it's a couple of years ago, but for a few reasons I want to talk about it. Number one is there's a lot of things we can learn from going through and talking about incidents like this, about everything that we talk about leadership, about stress, about making decisions, and the importance of those in training. And like I said, it's been in the news recently because one of the officers was criminally charged, and also the chief of the school police was charged, Arredondo. Before we get into it, though, I know I am very excited because this is, we're recording this the day that UFC is coming back after several weeks off.
Yes, to Paramount. So if you don't have Paramount, it's a good time to get it so that you can watch these fights, because there's a lot of really good fights on this card.
Yeah, and we were not sponsored by Paramount Plus or UFC.
Love to be, though.
If they're interested. Yeah. But yeah, so generally every UFC, we spend the evening on the couch watching and maybe have a cocktail or two and some good food.
Yep.
It's kind of our ritual.
Yeah. Steak tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Josh has ruined me on steakhouses now, because none of them are ever as good as the steak he makes at home.
Reverse sear on the Traeger, get it up to temperature, and then sear it in a cast iron with some rosemary and garlic and butter.
And by garlic, he means like maybe 2 cloves.
Yeah. I have to put extras in there because she'll walk by and eat them once they're cooked.
So you know I'm not a vampire.
Yeah. And we also know you love garlic. So for those that don't know about this incident, the Robb Elementary School shooting in Uvalde, Texas was obviously one of the deadliest school shootings in history. It was in 2022 in May. And I really thought after this happened, we were beyond some of the mistakes that were made on this, because, we learned how to respond as law enforcement to active shooters from like Columbine, where officers didn't make entry and they'd never seen anything like that. So you can, almost understand how Columbine happened the way it did. But training has evolved into a different, there's a different type of approach to these types of incidents. And we'll get into that as we go. But first, I just want to kind of go through some of the details of it, and then we'll go through some of the lessons learned, mistakes made. But so at 11:21 on May 24th of 2022, our 18-year-old suspect, and I'm not going to say his name, we choose not to give any more notoriety to the people that do this, shot his grandmother in the house. Seriously, didn't kill her, but injured her severely. Gets in a car, drives to Robb Elementary School, and about 100 yards away, he crashes the car in a ditch. A employee of the school heard the crash, stepped out of a door, propped the door open to see what had happened. Then she sees a suspect with a gun. So she goes inside, shuts the door, but it doesn't lock properly at this point. As the suspect approaches the school, he begins shooting at people outside of the school, including a nearby funeral home. He's armed with a rifle, semi-automatic rifle. Makes his way into the school through the door that was shut but not properly locked, and enters the school. He's shooting while in the hallway and makes his way to rooms 111 and 112. And inside those rooms, he ultimately kills 2 teachers and 19 fourth graders. So almost about the time the suspect makes entry into the school, the first officer arrives. And, from the research that I've done, the information that I have on that, there were employees telling the officer where the suspect was and basically begging him to go.
Yeah, not basically, they were.
Yeah.
They were begging him to go stop the suspect, and he did not do that.
And what he said after was basically this was a barricade. He was treating it as a barricaded subject. So in policing, you have a couple different categories of an armed subject inside a structure. you have a barricade, and generally on a barricaded subject, if there's nobody else inside with them, or you don't have information that those people inside with them are in danger, you treat it as a barricade. You slow it down, you surround, you try to make contact with the person, and you want to um, try and talk them out to end it peacefully, right? You don't want to push a bad situation and put, even on, and that's a lot of barricades. I mean, we have a suicidal person with a gun inside a house, and you want to try and get them out peacefully. You don't want to go push a use of force or a shooting if you can avoid it. And that is of responses with somebody armed inside a structure, that by far the most that you do, right? Is a cop. You have barricades all the time. From then you have hostage responses, like somebody's inside, you have information that the person is in danger with the suspect that's armed, and then you do make entry. And then you have what we're talking about today, an active shooter, where we know through all of the other incidents that have happened in the US over the last 20, 30 years, that that person will not stop killing people until they are confronted by police, which usually ends up with them being shot by police, giving up, or taking their own life, self-terminating, or however you want to call it. And this officer decided to make that call and say that this is a barricade, even though there were gunshots going on, people had already been shot, and it is that freeze.
Because this was not a barricade.
No.
That is not by any means what this was.
Well, and at no point when somebody has already shown that they're going to kill people, can you then barricade? Okay, if you're in a closet and nobody else is in there, then maybe you can slow it down, get more resources while you're getting people out to get resources to handle it. But if they're around people, no, you cannot go back to being a barricade. Once that suspect has decided to shoot people, it is an active shooter, and it needs to be treated as such, even if in that moment they are not shooting. And ultimately, 376 officers from multiple jurisdictions responded, and they did not make entry for 77 minutes. You had the chief of police, who was also criminally charged, Chief Arredondo, who's the chief of school police, arrive. And, we've watched the interviews that he did after, where he's literally saying, I figured everybody in that room with the suspect was dead. He was assuming that, even though that wasn't the case. There were
Did they even know where the suspect was at this time?
They knew at that point that he was in that room 111 or 112.
Okay.
And because he had also shot at officers down the hallway from that area when they were on scene. And if you watch all the video and the surveillance video and some of the body camera, you can see that. I mean, you have just so many officers there, and they are positioned around in the hallway, around the school. You do have some that are doing evacuations of adjoining classrooms, but really, I mean, the goal needs to be getting in, confronting the suspect, and taking him out, right? Like that ultimately is the goal when it comes to any kind of active shooter situation. And so you had this chief who did not do any of the things that leadership on an active shooter needs to get done. Even when you look at the DOJ report and all that, he didn't have a radio on him. He left it in his car. Never set up a command post to get officers resources and intel so they can deal with it. No commander's intent of go inside and shoot this person. Like, really, I mean, you boil it down to that. You can use all the tactical terminology you want, but ultimately go kill the bad guy before he kills any other kids. And so there were so many different failures, and we'll break down a little bit, but ultimately it took the Border Patrol tactical team, the BORTAC team, to arrive, know what this was, see that, all these officers were frozen, which we'll talk about how that can happen too, and ultimately make entry, engage a suspect, shoot and kill him. And 77 minutes, which I can't even imagine for those kids or teachers.
An hour and 17 minutes.
Yes. In a room with a suspect with dead bodies, waiting for that to, I mean, it's just so hard to even, sometimes it can be very sanitized when we talk about these incidents and we go through the details and, we talk about what could have gone better, but we lose some of the human side of what were those kids and people involved in this, and the parents outside begging the cops to go in and get the suspect and save their kids. I mean, just the gravity of that. And, that's really these kind of things happen so rarely in law enforcement. I mean, we've talked about there's on average 35 active shooters in the US a year, and active shooters specifically, not a mass shooting where it's like a party and a bunch of people get shot, but somebody actively going and killing people until they're stopped. About 35 a year. And we have roughly over 1 million law enforcement officers. So it's a low frequency event that you may have to respond to as a law enforcement, but you cannot fail. It's why training, knowing what to do, knowing how to do it, having the right mindset is so important for something that you may never respond to in your life. But you have to be willing, because look at the impact that this has had.
Mhm.
And, on so many different people, honestly, on the country. But I mean, how many families were affected? How, honestly, lives ruined. Imagine losing a child like that.
Not only the children and the teachers that were killed that day, because there were did we say how many? There
19,
were 19
yeah.
children and 2 teachers, right?
Yes.
And many more. How many other injuries? I think 40.
I don't have the exact number, but upwards of that.
Yeah. So because that's how many counts they were charged with, however many victims died and injuries. So I think there was a total of, between kids and teachers that died and were injured, I think it was a total of 40. But not only their lives and their families, but also the lives of those officers that were there that didn't do anything.
Yeah.
They have to live with that for the rest of their life, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's something to be said about that as well.
Yeah. I mean, part of me, and this is where it gets complicated, right? It's like, part of me is like, well, yeah, I mean, you kind of have to, because you didn't do what you needed to do.
I agree.
But at the same time, it's like,
there's still a human side of it, though, right?
Exactly. They're still humans. And we need to train our cops better, not just the tactical side. And we can do a better job at that too. Don't get me wrong. But also the mindset on how do you make these decisions under stress? I've been on these calls, a couple of them. And I'll tell you, like, the amount of stress, that almost impatience to get in and get this done and get it done right. And the anxiety that you're going to make the wrong call and get people killed, and all that is a huge weight on you when you're on these things, whether it's from a command level, because I have been the incident commander on one of these, UNLV, or the tactical response, like the 1 October one. Like, both of those carried a lot of heavy, difficult, intense emotions to try and push past. And, I can tell you guilt that I have afterwards from these things. And, mistakes I made. Could I have been faster? Could I have done, better? But I can't even imagine living with guilt if you just didn't act. And there is a reality where that decision making is diffused when you have that many people there and nobody's stepping up to make a decision. You have one chief that people are looking to, and they're, expecting him to make the decisions. And when it's not happening, everybody's just that diffusion of command. Like, nobody is making the right decision. And in those moments, absolutely, one of those 376 officers should have stepped up and said, "Hey, chief, we have to go."
Well, yeah. So let's break this down a little bit. So he gets there. The chief does. He does not set up. In policing, when you have a critical incident, the first thing you're supposed to do is set up a command post, correct? And
as leadership, right?
Yes, as leadership. And that means that you are, Josh describes it sometimes as putting a traffic cone on top of your car. It is just, it is a point where the person in charge, they're called the incident commander, they are going to be there, and this is where they make decisions from. This is where intel comes in and intel gets pushed out, right? So when a critical incident happens, first thing you're supposed to do is set up incident command, a command post. So right off the bat, as you mentioned, he fails to do that, right? So then he's getting information that it's a barricaded subject. So he just sticks with that. And everybody is standing down for the 77 minutes until the BORTAC guys get there and decide they're not going to listen to this guy and they're going to go in and take action, right?
Yeah, well, and they were waiting for SWAT. They activated the Uvalde SWAT team to go there. But again, and I talk about this in my class, it's almost never going to be your SWAT team that handles an active shooter. It's always going to be your patrol officers, maybe some detectives, maybe some canine guys. If you have what they have in certain agencies, these hybrid SWAT teams where you have patrol officers that are also SWAT trained that keep gear in their car. So you might have one or two of officers with that specialized training and gear. But yeah, ultimately, it doesn't matter as a leader if the first officer on scene is like, hey, you know, this is a barricade. He's barricaded in a room and he's shooting. Like, you have to be able to critically think under stress and say, no, this is an active shooter. Get in there and take him out. But that didn't happen. And so in his interviews after, and I don't know if this is what he was really thinking or afterwards he knew that, you know, he froze and didn't make the right decisions. So he's trying to, you know, give reasons for why he did what he did. But in his post interview after the incident, he's like, he literally says, I know we're going to get criticized for not making entry. He said, but I saw the holes in the walls from what he was shooting, the side, I heard the gunshots, I knew the caliber. So I just figured everybody was already dead inside. So I was trying to get people out that weren't dead.
So Josh actually shows this portion of the chief's interview when he goes and teaches his critical incident mindset class. And I can't wrap my brain around that statement. I just figured everyone was dead. Well, how is that even okay in the world of policing? You just figure everyone's dead, so you just take no action? Like, I can't. Every time I watch it, it just really, really grinds my gears. I can't. I'm trying to figure out how to not swear in this podcast. But it just really gets to me because I'm like, how in the world can you make that assumption? Even if that was the likelihood, how can you operate under that?
Yeah, I mean, really, you can't.
You shouldn't, or you shouldn't be a police officer, right?
Absolutely. And here's the thing: so I suspect, and this is our podcast, so I can give my opinions freely.
Yeah, F that guy on LinkedIn, by the way.
Yeah. Someone didn't like that on LinkedIn. I said I'm going to withhold my opinion on whether that officer charge should have been acquitted or not, and we'll get into that in the next podcast. But I truly feel that chief froze, and that was something he was saying after to justify his actions of not making entry.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in policing so many times. Someone makes the wrong call, and then they just die on that hill to justify rather than admitting to a mistake that they made. So, you know, it really is. I mean, yeah, he has to live with that. And that chief has been criminally charged, as he should.
I honestly think he should be charged with more than he is charged with. We'll get into what he's being charged with. But I think he should be charged with much more than that.
Yeah. So in everything that we've read, studied, watched on this, and we've been talking about it for years in this class, just come to the realization it was a complete failure of leadership.
Yeah.
There was a lack of leadership and it stopped any kind of forward action. And that is the power of leadership, right? That's you can make people go forward. You can make people do what they have to do. You can also stop people.
Well, it was a failure of leadership. Actually, the Department of Justice did a after action report on this, and it's very long. But it was they said, let's see. Response to the active shooter was a failure marked by cascading failures of leadership, decision-making, tactics, policy, and training. So literally every single facet of a critical incident, they failed in. So it was a huge leadership failure, but it later talks about in the report how there was confusion between different agencies that were responding on who was in control, who had command. So the responding agencies didn't communicate either, which we've seen that when we've gone to some places to do tabletop exercises, which we explained, I think, in last week's podcast, but that is where you get all different agencies that would respond to a critical incident: police, fire, medical, city workers, a city manager, everybody together in one room, and you go through different scenarios. Okay, if we had an active shooter at a school in our area, how would who would be what role? What does that look like? And you get everybody in the room and talking so that when something terrible does happen, there's no confusion. Everybody knows their part. Everybody knows their role. But that didn't happen here either. So you finally had the Border Patrol, who was an outside agency, come in and just handle it because nobody was making a decision. Any single agency that showed up to that, when they saw that there were no decisions being made, they could have just done what the Border Patrol did, but they didn't either.
They didn't, or any single officer, and any officer on scene could have said, "Hey, chief, this needs to be handled different. There's kids inside dying, and we need to make entry, and this is what we train for. This is how we do it." Someone could have stood up and said that.
That is my confusion on this whole incident, is how you had that many officers there and not one said, or I mean, maybe they did, but they didn't do anything. And that I know that in law enforcement, it's, it's militaristic. You have a military structure, right? Mm-hmm. And a chain of command. And I understand that. But in something like this, I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, I think beyond law enforcement, I think there's some psychology there, right? Is people are looking for leadership under stress. They're looking for somebody else to make a decision. It's like, what they teach you in an emergency is don't just say, somebody call 911. You call 911 because everybody thinks the other person's going to do it. And I'm not excusing the behavior. I'm not. I do think some officers should have stepped up and just honestly ignored that command. Like, this is no, it's not. We're going, you, let's go in and take this guy out. Should have happened. But what I am doing is trying to maybe explain the behavior of why that can happen. And again, like we said earlier in this podcast, every single one of those officers on that scene has to live with that. And again, there's consequences to those actions. I remember as a young officer in the academy, they're like, hey, this is the only job you can go to jail for if you don't do your job right. And obviously with officers getting charged on this, that happened, and we'll get more into that in the next podcast, part 2 of this. But you brought up such a good point. We think of active shooter training as like the tactical going through, you have all the cool gear and you're going through a school or a mall and you're training for what you're going to do. I mean, we do that kind of training, but there's so much more to it, right? Getting everybody in the room that would have to respond, especially leadership, like those tabletop exercises, and literally going through, what would your role be? Would you actually take command? You're the school police chief, or are you expecting the city police or the county police to come and take over? And let's talk about it now. I say this.
It is truly terrifying sitting in a room. It's good. It's good to be present when, there are those tabletops, but it is a little bit scary when nobody has an answer. But that's the point of the tabletops, is to figure it out in that room. Well, but I will say, in my mind, sometimes when I've been in these, I've thought, okay, well, if there was an emergency like yesterday, what would anyone have done? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it is scary to see that, but it's also really good that those people are there willing to figure it out.
Yes.
How many counties and agencies aren't even doing that? So yeah, I mean, we've been in tabletops where there's zero plan. We don't know. Okay, well, let's talk through it. And they leave there knowing at least a starting point. Mm-hmm. And then I can come back out and get more in depth in it and really help them through it. But at least how many counties and jurisdictions in this country are not even doing that?
Well, clearly not in Uvalde.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope they are now.
Yeah. Well, the first time that I'm seeing somebody else from another agency on a critical incident should not be during that critical incident. It should be well before that. And I beat myself up on the UNLV one, because the UNLV, it took us a while to get keys, even longer to get keys at work. It took us a while to get a map. And I had worked with UNLV police on other things and other incidents. But what I hadn't done was, hey, if there's an active shooter here, where do I get keys? Who do I ask for? So even I do this. And that was a huge learning experience for me. We were still successful. We had a successful response on that because, our agency had trained, I had prepared, I'd been on them before and been able to lead through it. But yeah, even then, it taught me the importance of everybody being on the same page, everybody prepared and know, yeah, when I'm on this, I'm going to need a map. I'm going to need keys. I'm going to need communications. How can you notify the parents that this is going on? All these things that should happen before.
Which was also a failure for Uvalde. They, let's see, in the DOJ report, it also talks about how post-event miscommunication affected families and the public. They received incorrect or delayed information about their loved ones, inaccurate updates, and conflicting messages. This added unnecessary trauma for victims, families, and the community. So, again, the PIO portion of this was not what it needed to be either.
Yeah, and we've learned if you don't push information out timely, accurately, and one message, because on this, you have the school district PIO, you have the police department PIO, you have medical PIO, you have all these different PIOs, and if they're not all communicating, and the ICS, which is the national standard for responding to any kind of large scale event, if they're not all on the same page, if they're not communicating, you're pushing out information incorrectly, then that creates another headache that you have to deal with. You have parents showing up, you have people pushing past the police to get to their own kid. You have all these different things that can happen because you're not communicating effectively. It's not one message. You're not providing updates, because that just adds to public panic rather than let them know that you're on top of it. Another thing, so I was at a tactical officer association teaching my class, and I talked to one of the board tactical guys that was there. And he said they responded, they were doing training nearby. They heard the call, responded, and he had to park almost a mile out and run to the scene because every of those 376 officers responded, just jumped out of their car in the middle of the road and ran in. So all the ways to get there, the ingress routes, were jammed up with cars. So if you're an officer listening to this, it doesn't seem like a big thing, but parking so you can get medical in, you can get other resources in, is really important.
Well, that happened on UNLV as well. Mm-hmm. So, officers responded and they were all parking in one area that you needed to get medical in, right? So you had to direct somebody to move all those cars and told them to break windows if they had to.
Yeah. Bill us later, but we had to get resources in. Because I had been on these and I knew that was a big deal. Why we were able to get medical in 7 minutes after the first 911 call on that. And because brave officers went forward not because of me, like they knew their job, went forward and addressed the suspect and took him out. Like, there was a lot of wins on that because we were training and preparing our people long before. But you can never train enough for something like this. You have to be an expert in your craft for when everything is falling apart around you. And I truly believe that is our purpose for our business is, we don't deal as much with the tactics. We do with some of the tactical parts of it. But more so, it's the mindset. I understand that this is stressful, scary, makes you anxious. You don't want to fail. Here's how you mitigate those to have a coherent response. Because the duality of that, the cops that get there right away and jump out of their car and run in are usually the ones I want there. Obviously not, on the Uvalde incident that anybody can come up the streets, but generally those ones that are rushing to get there and not thinking about anything else other than getting to the bad guy, give me those guys. And then as a leader, I can direct them to do what they need to do. So, there was a lot of failures, and really to drive home, I say this in every tabletop. I think I've done at least a blog and maybe a podcast, a short podcast on this. And this was an old SWAT sergeant used to say this all the time when I was brand new in K9 in 2005. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So the training that you have to do is well beyond just the tactical training. It's training your leaders. It's training the community members that are going to take part in this, and the schools and all of that. All of us have to be on the same page if we're going to have a successful response to something like this. And something like this, we can't fail. But unfortunately, there still are failures. And on this one, we're talking about this one, but I can name 10 others where, just off the top of my head, where the cops responded and did exactly what they needed to do. Doesn't mean there weren't 100 mistakes. Every one I've been on, no matter how well it went, there were a bunch of mistakes made and we could do things better. But the nuts and bolts because they're prepared because they train. You can think of like 2 in Nashville, even the recent one in the LDS church. Is that Michigan? Even that one, watch the body cameras of those officers. I mean, they got there. This looked different than other active shooters because he was on the outside of the school, and we did a podcast on that, but or the outside of the church, I'm sorry. They responded and engaged the suspect and took him out. So don't think by this podcast and what we're talking about that our officers aren't prepared for this. Yeah. But there are failures, and if we don't talk about these, then we don't learn from them. Because if you don't think Uvalde could happen again, it absolutely could. Yeah. It's the importance of leadership, and it's importance of training our leaders that are going to respond to know, hey, I have to get on the radio and say, go take this suspect out. I have to do it. But you don't think you do, because we all know on an active shooter what we're supposed to do. But under stress, our people, some of them need that nudge to go do that. So, it is important to talk about these things and to learn about them. And that doesn't mean just say, yep, everybody on that call was a coward. I would never do that.
That drives me crazy. Yeah. You have all these keyboard warriors out there that if I were there, I would go. Well, you weren't, and you don't know that. So
rather than just, because when you do that, you don't learn from it. Let's really learn from what happened, how to fix it, and how we can move forward. We learned from Columbine. The tactics that I learned early in my career that are still very similar on how to respond to an active shooter. I mean, they've evolved a little bit here and there, but they were from Columbine. This happened. We realized we didn't train our cops right to handle something like this. And now this is what we need to do to handle it. And, then it was you have to have a team of 5 officers or you can't make entry. So now we train solo officer, 2 officer, 3 officer responses because that might be what you have. And having that mindset of, you know what, we're going to go and engage a suspect. If we can't take them out because they're barricaded in a position, at least they're shooting at us and not shooting kids at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. And so next podcast on Uvalde, we're going to talk about the first officer on scene that just was acquitted on all charges, which really grinds my gears. And we're also going to talk about the chief whose trial is upcoming in June, I believe. And we're also going to talk about, we've shared it on a podcast previous, but talk a little bit about the mindset for an incident like this. And I'd like to end the podcast with a new segment called Salutes and Salutations. We salute all those people that support us and have positive comments. And I send a salutation to the man on LinkedIn who was very critical of Josh for not giving his opinion on Uvalde because he's not dumb. And LinkedIn can be a wild ride. Yeah. So I hope you're listening to this podcast, sir.
Yeah. You want my opinion? Subscribe, leave a review, share the podcast with a friend.
Yeah. So salutations to you, sir. I hope you're having a better day.
Yeah. Well, and I do mean that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for spending some time with us today. And if you want to hear more about this stuff, there's more in my book, The Courage to Live, which is available on Amazon. And again, thank you for spending time with us.